Voice. We're telling the stories of Kansas City nonprofits and the people behind them. Casey Cares is proudly sponsored by the Ewing Marion Kaufman Foundation. I'm Ruth Baum-Biggis. Cooperation in our city, very important thing. Bringing 119 cities throughout the region, 9 counties, 2 states together to work on behalf of one region. Who does that? It's the Mid-America Regional Council. And David Warm is the executive director of this incredible organization who has a lot of hard work to do. David, we're so glad to have you on Casey Cares.
Thank you, Ruth. I'm pleased to be here.
All right, well, we've got to start. You know, there's been so much conversation of late of, can't people just talk and do things together? Well, it sounds like that's MARC's charge. Tell us a little bit about the basics of Mid-America Regional Council.
Well, thank you, Ruth. We, in fact, exist to do exactly what you said, is to bring communities and people together to help us become a stronger metropolitan area through cooperation and collaboration. We are a public organization. We are formed by agreement among local governments across the metropolitan area. As you said, 9 counties, 2 states, 119 cities, and over 2 million people. And so there's a lot of interest. We're governed by a board of elected officials, local elected officials, mayors, city council members, county commissioners, who are appointed not by me, but by their respective jurisdiction to come around the table. And then they, in turn, work through a series of committees and task forces and working groups that bring together hundreds, probably thousands of other people, not-for-profit organizations, business leaders, professionals in local government, other elected officials who work around a variety of agenda and issues that the community puts forth as priorities. So we work in lots of policy areas: transportation, the environment, public safety, early education, older adult services, local government cooperation. We've been in the middle of trying to coordinate a lot of public health response to this current pandemic. And so we often are called into service to bring the capacity for communities and institutions to work together when there is an urgent or compelling need in the community.
Can you share with us a little bit about the history of MARC? It seems like you've always been there, but that's not the case.
No. Regional councils like ours exist across the country. Most major metropolitan areas will have a council of governments or regional councils. They actually exist in non-metropolitan areas. In the state of Missouri, there's a network of 19 regional councils. In Kansas, most of them are referred to as economic development districts. And these are multi-jurisdictional units that help bring the capacity for people, cities, counties to work together on priorities that they choose. We were formed officially in 1972 when Ilis Davis was mayor. Jan Myers, who was a former congressman, Overland Park City Council member, was our first board chair. And they brought together a couple of organizations at the time, merged them, and created the Mid-America Regional Council. And we have grown and flourished over time, partly because we create a forum that is used by the community, used by our leadership to address issues in a way that the leadership demands. It is less about what I want, what our staff wants. It is more about what the people who gather around our table decide to do collectively. And if you create the right information, the right processes, the right motivations, you can get a lot done. And I think we've done a lot over the last 30 years.
That's our cue. You've been the head for 30 years, although you're very young. I mean, you must have come when you were 15. What's it been like to helm an organization like this? Over, my gosh, those 30 years, there's been a lot going on and a lot of change.
Yeah, it is hard for me to even say it because it seems like a long time, but I've stayed because I think we make a difference. I think the work is important, and because it is endlessly interesting and constantly changes. And I think that is the key. An organization like this cannot exist to deliver services and programs it's attached to. It needs to be nimble, responsive, a tool, if you will, to be used by our constituency, the broad metropolitan area, to achieve common outcomes. And so over the course of the time that I've been here, we have had to consistently sort of change what we do, how we do it, and why we do it. I would say when I first arrived, a lot of what we did was motivated by federally driven planning directives and context. And then a couple of things happened. There was things like the Hyatt disaster, and there was a heat wave in the early 1990s. And that caused communities to come together to say, you know, we've got to build some capacity to respond in a more effective way to public health, public safety emergencies. How can we do that? And so over that time, we began working more specifically on those kinds of issues. And then as we became successful as a region, the ambition and the expectation to do more and more has morphed. And so we have continued over the time to change what we work on and how we do it. And it keeps me fresh and focused as a leader, but more important, it keeps us relevant to the current needs of the metropolitan area.
Well, I want to jump into some of the issues and the topics that you all deal with, but let's get to know MARC. What does your team look like, and how do you organize what I would think could be chaotic if you didn't have buckets, as it were?
Yeah, we do have buckets, but having said that, what I think is really important to understand is that, yeah, MARC has a staff, and I can tell you how the staff is organized, but everything we do, every single thing we do as an agency is done through others outside of ourselves. Everything is overseen, led by, influenced by a constituency that is beyond the borders of this organization. So when you say, how's MARC organized, it is hard to talk about that without talking about the thousands of volunteers and public leaders who come together to work on one issue or many issues. We have a series of departments. We have a transportation and environment department, and they focus on developing long-range transportation plans, doing technical studies, allocating federal and state money that comes into our region for transportation investments. They work on air quality, on rideshare. They have a very long agenda of services and programs and functions. We work a lot in public safety, and we run the regions, coordinate the region's 911 system, for instance, and we coordinate emergency response and homeland security systems and public health response systems, and that's a coordinative role. And that's another unit of people. We have a research team that focuses a lot on data and economic research, some focus on older adults. We're doing some really interesting work around how to serve older adults in the metropolitan area. We manage a major Head Start program and work on metropolitan early education access and quality. And we work on intergovernmental services as well. So we have a series of 7 departments, and that's a little less interesting than to know that we have a broad range of competencies that are at the core of what we do: communications, planning, data management, certain expertise in areas like transportation, the environment, older adults, gerontology, early education, and so forth, that sort of come together to create the competencies that we need to be able to respond to the constituencies that we serve.
Well, I know a couple of your team have been there for just a little while. I've had the pleasure of talking with Marlene Nagel, yeah, and Mr. Link, working as a working journalist. You guys were always a great resource for us if we wanted, quick data or a dive into an area. Casey Cares also had one of your team on to talk about older adult initiatives, which is something I know, yes, yeah, is not always top of mind, unfortunately, but oh so important. Let's dive a little bit into what I always mention is the elephant in the room, and that's a global pandemic that we've all been dealing with. How has MARC adjusted what it does to the constraints of the pandemic?
Yeah, it's a really pertinent question, and it has been the issue of 2020, and I think it will frame what we're going to be doing in 2021 and beyond. So that what we're doing is just not static, it is relevant to the moment at hand. So we, for instance, on a dime, had to build the capacity to bring together public health and elected officials and emergency service organizations and hospitals in a way to coordinate information and resources and responses to the coronavirus. So we played a very important role in convening and helping the decisions to be made with consistency between state and local governments and among all of the local governments on both sides of the state line. We've had a very important role in deploying certain programmatic elements of that. For instance, we have been producing and delivering community-based testing initiatives in partnership with federally qualified health centers around the region to reach into community places that would be hard to reach otherwise. But then in our functional areas, we have had to retool virtually everything we do. As an example, in our Head Start program, we are in classrooms, we are working with teachers, with administrators, and helping them build up stronger, more effective early education programs. And the early education world has been turned on its ear because of the pandemic. Our team has had to start doing a lot of their work and their training and their outreach remotely. But beyond that, we have had to help early education centers who are struggling financially, struggling with serving parents, struggling with parents being able to meet tuition. We've been helping them thrive and figure out ways to get through this situation. Our older adult services, for instance, we deliver thousands of meals a day to older adults who cannot get out of their home. And within weeks, we had to sort of retool that program, buy a freezer, work with some community organizations, and we almost doubled the number of people we were able to serve within a matter of 3 weeks. And so everything we have done has had to be retooled and reimagined to respond to the situation at hand. And not to over answer your question, but I think our work going forward is going to continue to require us to respond in a way that helps with recovery. We're going to be focused now on vaccination and public health. We helped coordinate a program that gets people adults back into the college classroom that haven't finished degrees called Casey degrees. We're expanding that to work on retraining for non-degreed workforce who have been put out of work or disemployed as a result of the economic downturn. We're trying to help that group of employees skill up in ways that they can re-engage. We're focused more intently in the future on housing, which has become a really critical issue for more and more families, and will continue and go probably well beyond the length of the actual pandemic. So I think that without giving too many examples, what I would say is for any nonprofit, certainly for ours, that in order to be relevant, in order to be useful, you've got to not just continue to try to do what you've done. You've got to assume this has been a new world over the last year, and it's going to continue to be a new world over the next year. And so you've got to adjust to be able to be useful to the community and helping lead that transition.
We're going to take a quick break, but when we return with David Warm of Mid-America Regional Council, we're going to take even a deeper dive into how the organization has been really a critical entity in helping us weather this pandemic. Welcome back to KC Cares. We're talking with David Warm, who heads the Mid-America Regional Council. 119 cities, right?
You got it.
Oh my gosh. We've got to talk about how do you corral all those people. That is masterful, my friend.
I don't think it's about corralling. I think if you try to corral them, you're never going to succeed. It's around convening and listening and finding the common ground. And that's what we try to do.
So in talking about the pandemic, it sounds like one of the things that you feel was successful for you as a leader is being able to be nimble and respond to very changing circumstances.
That's exactly true. One example I didn't give that is, I think, extraordinary and reflects not just on this organization, but on the entire community, was the creation of the Kansas City COVID-19 Regional Response and Recovery Fund. And our organization partnered with the Greater Kansas City United Way, with the Community Foundation of Greater Kansas City, and with a local initiative support commission, LISC, which is a housing and community development intermediary. And we helped organize a fund that within a month raised $17 million and has been strategically invested in urgent response needs that are occurring in families and communities across the region. And that happened in large part because major foundations, notably the Hall Family Foundation in Sunderland, sort of challenged the community, and we had dozens and dozens and dozens of companies and individuals, thousands of individuals, write checks, contribute to a fund, and we brought the community together to invest those quickly, responsibly, strategically in urgent human needs. And that's a story that's a little bit less about our organization and more about the generosity of this town, the power of collaboration, and the need to be nimble and responsive in the face of changing circumstances. And I'm really proud of how Kansas City has responded in the creation and deployment of that fund.
Can you bring us up to date on how many organizations and how much money has gone out? And then I'd like to know, where is that fund going?
Fair enough. And I don't, the short answer, the first part of your question is, there was about $17 million that has been raised or donated to that fund, again, from foundations, corporations, individuals. A list of those is on the Greater Kansas City Community Foundation website called growyourgiving.org if people are interested in, as is a list of many of the grantees that have been awarded funding over the last 10 months. And to date, I think over 260 different organizations have been funded. Some of them are really well-known groups like Harvesters, but others are very small, community-based organizations that are reaching hard-to-reach communities in really important and relevant ways. And I'm really proud of how we have been able to uncover through the process of administering the funds different kinds of organizations that normally don't reach the attention of fundraising. And in the last couple of rounds, we have focused on some strategic partnerships that have brought different communities together and have leveraged some of the private money with other private money and public money. For instance, we put some money into a really thoughtful eviction response program that the United Way is coordinating with many other legal services and housing organizations that is doing a great job of keeping people in their homes. We've focused strategically on a community partnerships that's being led by Turn the Page KC, that's helping on both sides of the state line with students who can't get back in the classroom, have a safe place to study, learn, and be supported while their parents are at work. And so there are several sort of strategic efforts like that we've invested in. And now we're focused right now, we've got about $3 million in the fund that have not yet been allocated. And we're focused on similar kind of strategic responses to three big needs that have emerged during the pandemic. And one of them is food security, which persists. That's been an early priority of the fund, but it is a particular focus at this point in time. Behavioral and mental health, which has become increasingly urgent in many ways and expressed itself in many ways. And then domestic violence, which has also been, that system has been under a lot of pressure over the last 10 months because of the stresses economically and socially that have been exhibited in many parts of the region. And so we are working on that. The second part of your question is where are we going? And I think that is still a little bit of an open question. We know that there are some continuing needs, social needs, but I think one of the specific urgent needs we have is getting vaccination into places where it would be hard to reach otherwise. And the vaccination availability is just ramping up. And as it ramps up and gets to the level we hope it will very quickly, we've got to be in a position as a community to respond. So we are just starting that conversation with the funders and with the participation in the funds. Should this continue? Do we want to continue to keep this going, to work on some of these issues that we know are going to face our community, or should we be addressing those in some other way? But that's an agenda item for 2021.
It's amazing to me how fast that whole fund ramped up and the generosity of the community. We were lucky enough to have Denise St. Omer on from the foundation to talk a little bit in the very beginning about what can organizations do, how do they go about trying to get some funding and get some support and get some help. And again, it sounds like through collaboration, you've made a slight pandemic pivot as to where funds may go now and to what the new or the emerging priorities have become.
Yep. Yeah, it really is an unprecedented effort in my experience in Kansas City. I mean, we certainly have a good track record of bringing funders together to cooperatively invest in a big idea. But if you stop and think about it, the scale and the urgency of the problem we faced, I mean, overnight, families were under stress and couldn't get food, couldn't stay in their homes. I mean, and lots of them. And so overnight, the scale of the problem, the fact that it touched every corner of the region all at once, it wasn't just one part of town or one city or another. The fact that the number of funders that came together, big and small, was unprecedented. The amount of money that was raised, the speed at which it was raised, the speed at which it was dispersed. Within a month, we had $17 million committed as a town, and we had already allocated and dispersed the first 50 or 60 grants, which was, it's just, that's an extraordinary sort of response. And it makes me, again, really attach importance to the idea of collaboration as a powerful way to do something bigger than you might otherwise be able to do. And secondly, the power of generosity and goodwill. And that reflects so well on Kansas City in a very important way.
Well, we would love to give a shout out to you and the foundation and United Way and LISC for pulling that together and shine a spotlight on that. I think sometimes the people doing the heavy lifting don't get credit, and often are people who don't want to take credit, but really it's been a marvelous thing. Many nonprofit organizations that are out there doing good work and trying to make a difference. So kudos to you all. I've got to ask, we should find out how you got into this work. How did you begin this? How did we get David Warm from warm California to Kansas City to lead MARC?
Well, it's always love or money, Ruth, and it turned out to be a little bit of both. And I grew up in California, as you say. I went to school out there, and I got out of graduate school with a degree in public administration. I was headed for a community service, and at the time, it was just after a bad economy and Proposition 13. There was a single job in California in public leadership, and we began to get interested in city management, which is I learned about in graduate school. And so I applied for the 3 best urban internships that were in America at that time, in Miami, in Phoenix, and Kansas City. And I really wanted to go to Phoenix. But Kansas City offered me the job, and I thought, oh, I could do that for a year. So I drove out here with everything I owned in the back of a Toyota Corolla, thinking I would stay 1 year and move back to California. But I found here just an energy, a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose that has kept me here. And so I stayed on in Kansas City, and then I moved up to Liberty and became the city manager up there. I was up there for 9 years, and then I came down to MARC in 1990, not planning to stay 30 years, but as I said, I've stayed because the work stays endlessly interesting, and I think we make a difference. And then along the way, love happens, families happen, and I've put down roots, and this town is mine, and I'm not leaving.
Oh, see, we're just Midwest nice. we get into your heart.
Yeah.
You mentioned that there are similar organizations to MARC all across the country. Is there an association or a way that you all get together and talk about common issues?
Yep, absolutely. It's called the National Association of Regional Council. In fact, the current president of the National Association of Regional Council is Councilwoman Marge Vogt on Olathe, who's a member of our board, a past board chair. And we have had 3 board chairs out of Kansas City at the National Association. So we're very active. There's a particularly relevant group where I interact with my counterparts, the executive directors of other major metro regional councils on a very regular basis. We share information, we share ideas, we communicate with one voice on policy matters when that's important. And it's a very helpful influence. But every one of us are different across America. We're structured different, we focus on different, there's some commonalities and there's some overlap in interests, and that we're funded differently, we play different roles in our community. And I think the work we do at MARC is somewhat unique among our peers because it is broader than most of our counterparts. Most of our counterparts focus a lot on transportation and public safety, but we have a much broader agenda that has been responsive to the needs of our region.
How has that national group assisted you all, if at all, during the pandemic and unrest? We didn't even talk about, the social justice component that has been thrown into the mix in a presidential election and everything that all that brought.
Well, they've been very responsive. I mean, a very practical thing that they did is that they set up weekly calls of the major metro directors, and I get on them when I can. Some weeks I can't. Sometimes there's an agenda, sometimes there's an outside speaker, and that led last summer to a subset of that group co-leading the question of how, as regional councils, can we better respond to the issues of racial equity and diversity in our regions. How can we understand the history of them? How can we address them? How can we develop our processes and systems that are more inclusive and more open and more responsive to the diversity of racial perspectives? And so we went through a process of 3 or 4 discussions, and we're continuing to do that to learn from one another about how we can advance social justice at a regional level in ways that we haven't already been able to focus on. And now as we're working on policy matters like the Stimulus Act and the economic, a new agenda, the National Association is helping us understand and influence and speak with one voice around policy matters that are either pandemic related or related to a shift in federal direction. So they've been very helpful, very responsive. They aren't a large organization. They aren't hugely funded. We aren't a national lobbying organization, but they have been very supportive to helping each of their members be more effective by learning from one another and connecting to one another. And that's essentially what we all do within our own regions. It's about creating the possibility of doing more by talking, learning, and doing it in conjunction with others. And we have found over the years at MARC that we can get more done oftentimes by working together.
You've got lots of people involved just by virtue of the various governmental bodies. Is there a way that the general John or Jane Q citizen can become involved and engaged with MARC? And if so, how do they do that?
Yeah, there are lots of ways, and frankly, that is one of our objectives this year, is to become a little bit more clear about how to engage if you aren't in an official position. But for instance, we do a ton of work and are often doing public outreach and public communications. This last year, in the middle of a pandemic, we updated the region's long-range transportation plan, and we began doing a ton of work and outreach all over the region in helping to get public input and engagement about how that should be prioritized and focused. And we do a fair amount of that work. We also do bring citizens into various committees and working groups. They're often asked by an organization in which they're involved to become, and then we also bring some volunteers, especially in programs like our older adult services that often will help volunteers become engaged in helping to serve older adults. So there are ways for the general public to engage. Most of what we do is involved in getting organizations to work together. Whether they're city governments, county governments, not-for-profits, universities, businesses, we tend to work at an inter-organizational level, but we also do a lot of outreach and communication with the general public. Our website is very handy. It's got a ton of data, a ton of information, marc.org. I encourage people to take a look at it.
You read my mind. I was gonna say we need to get that website. I was on it in prepping for our conversation today, and you can just get lost in all the things that are there and all the helpful information and even the graphics.
Yeah, if you're a data geek, you would have a really good time. We've got some great maps and some great data, some great visuals. I mean, for instance, the Kauffman Foundation once a year does a survey. It's a statistically valid survey of how people are feeling about the quality of life in Kansas City. And they have asked us to analyze it and present the results to the community. And so there's a web page on our website, marc.org, that is really interesting. You can go in, it's very user-friendly, and you can find out a lot about how people in your community or across the region are viewing the quality of their life and what drives their thinking about that. So there's lots of tools there that are readily available for engagement.
The past 12 months have been like no other. What's been the most challenging for you as a leader of MARC?
I think that the challenge has been, frankly, the fact that there have been so many levels of decision-making required for a truly effective response to the pandemic, that it has been difficult to get them aligned in a way that we usually have more time to do. And so the federal response has been not as clear or as consistent as it could be. The states have responded in different ways completely. And they've had differences within their state governments about how to respond. And then you take that down to the local government, and those same dynamics are in place, but in a different way in every one of our jurisdictions. And so those dynamics have been very, very challenging. I would say, secondly, we have turned in this crisis to our public health system, which we have underinvested in historically. And so we asked organizations which are overworked and underfunded and have been for a long time to suddenly be on point to do a level of thinking and planning and response that simply was not in place. And so that had to be built. And I think there's an extraordinary group of public health leaders in this region who work very well together and have responded with really good intention and professionalism. But it has been a hard, stressful go. And so everybody that we've brought together, whether they're businesses, public leaders, professionals in public health or public safety, every one of them are stressed on the home front, and they're coming now through Zoom, usually downtown, but now through Zoom to make decisions that are stressful at a regional level. And so it's been a very, very challenging set of circumstances. And the pace at which decisions had to be made made the situation all that much more urgent. And so it's been a tough year. Having said that, we've made a ton of progress. And we have much more normalization of how we're doing this across the region than you might think. We have incredible communication and coordination among hospitals that normally have not had to coordinate their systems because they're frankly competitors in many senses, but they have dropped all of those instincts and have been working incredibly well together in responding to urgent public health needs. And so I think that in spite of the pressures, we have seen the best of people and institutions come forward to say we've got to respond to the public and put the public needs first. And I think that sense of public service and public commitment has really shined over the last year. So it has been a stressful year. It has been a hard year, but it's also been a gratifying year in that we've seen the best of this town come forward in many ways, philanthropically, professionally, and in terms of their public service motivation.
I love that you left us with a positive way to look at the craziness of the world. And we are so grateful that there is a Mid-America Regional Council and that you're at the head of it, and you didn't decide you're going to go do something else. So we're so glad, and we appreciate the conversation. We hope our audience will go to marc.org and check out all the things that are there, how you can become engaged, how you can learn more information, how you can influence the many things that go on in our region. David, thank you so much.
Ruth, thank you for having me. Thank you for what you do for this town.
Thank you. And thank you for listening to Casey Cares, Kansas City's nonprofit voice. We're produced by Charitable Communications, and we're proudly sponsored by the Ewing Marion Kaufman Foundation. If you'd like to be a guest or for underwriting opportunities, please visit our website at kccaresonline.org. You can spread the love and find us on Facebook and Twitter at Casey Cares Radio, and on Instagram at Casey Cares Online. And you can catch us on ESPN 1510 AM and 94.5 FM Saturday mornings at 8 a.m. Thank you for listening to Casey Cares.